1.3 Cardiovascular System Assessment. The CV system is very important in daily life, as you will have no health and fitness without it, as it oxygenates your blood and provides your body with needed oxygen during exercise. Functions of the CV system. The cardiovascular system is composed of the heart, blood and blood vessels. It connects all parts of the body through the arteries, veins, arterioles, venules and capillaries. Through this network, the blood delivers and expels nutrients, gases, waste products and chemical messengers throughout the body. In relation to sport, athletes such as Mo Farah will require a fast rate of removing the waste products because his muscles need to respire and get rid of CO2 to allow more oxygen to be supplied to the muscles. Red blood cells transport oxygen, while white blood cells detect infection and kill foreign microbes and toxins. Clotting mechanisms further protect the body from blood loss when there's a wound. For example, if an athlete falls and cuts themselves on the track, then a scab will form to prevent infections getting in, which is vital as they don't want to become ill and stop them from training. The cardiovascular system works alongside the respiratory system to deliver oxygen to the body's tissues to remove carbon dioxide. It also helps to maintain constant body temperature through the process of thermoregulation. This will help an athlete because their muscles will need to be warm to prevent injury during exercise and cool down after to remove lactic acid from the muscles. 2. Circulation. The double circulation consists of two circuits: the pulmonary circuit, which carries carbon dioxide rich blood from the heart to the lungs and back, and the systemic circuit, which transports oxygen rich blood from the heart to the rest of the body and back. To start, the oxygenated blood leaves the lungs and enters the left atrium through the left and right superior and inferior pulmonary vein. This stage is the second half of the pulmonary circuit. Then the systemic circuit takes over, which supplies the oxygenated blood to all non-pulmonary tissues. The oxygenated blood leaves the left ventricle through the aorta and travels down the arteries, then the arterioles, and finally reaching the capillaries, which diffuses the blood into the muscles, as you can see in the picture, and are good for gas exchange. Then, when the muscles have used the blood, the systemic circuit returns deoxygenated blood to the right atrium through the superior and inferior vena cava. This happens by the deoxygenated blood diffusing across the capillary beds, travelling along the venules, veins, and finally into the atrium. The last stages of the pulmonary circuit is where the deoxygenated blood exits the right ventricle through the pulmonary trunk and branches into the left and right pulmonary artery and finally enters the lungs and eventually the smaller arterial feeds capillaries surrounding the alveolus. The level of deoxygenated blood depends on how much the muscles are working. When the blood becomes deoxygenated again in the lungs and the system goes again. Heart anatomy. The heart plays a crucial role as a dual pump in the health and sporting performance. The structure of the heart wall has three distinct layers. The first layer is the endocardium and lines the inside of the heart. The middle layer is the cardiac muscle and is the thickest layer of the heart, as you can see in the picture. The microscopic appearance of the cardiac muscle shows the branch fibers and intercalated discs. The third layer of the epicardium that covers the outside of the heart. Also, you can see in the picture is the pericardium, which is the membrane lining of the pericardium cavity which surrounds the heart. As you can see in the diagram, the top two chambers are the atrium and are structurally thinner than the myocardium, and their function is to receive blood from the body and transport the blood downwards into the ventricles. The bottom two chambers of the image are the ventricles and are structurally thinner than the myocardium, and their function is to receive blood from the atrium and direct blood upwards to the body via the aorta and to the lungs via the pulmonary artery. The intraventricular septum is the dividing wall between the left and right ventricles. The right ventricle and right atria are connected by the tricuspid valve, and the left atria and left ventricle are connected by the bicuspid valve. The leaflets of the aortoventricular valves are connected to the fibrous tissue called chordae tendineae, which is attached to the papillary muscles. There are also valves at the opening of the pulmonary trunk and the aorta called the pulmonary valve and the aortic valves, which are together called the semilunar valves. The thickness of the walls of the four heart chambers vary with their functions. The walls of the aorta atria are thinner than the ventricles of the blood that need to be pumped into the adjacent ventricles only. The left ventricle pumps a greater distance and a higher pressure, therefore the walls of the left ventricle are thicker than the right ventricle. Conduction system controlling the cardiac cycle of the heart. The cardiac cycle consists of alternate periods of contraction and relaxation. Diastole is relaxation when the chambers are filling and the blood is shown in the picture 1. Systole is contraction when the blood is ejected into ventricles and then ejected into the pulmonary trunk and the ascending aorta shown in the second picture. To start off, the deoxygenated blood enters the vena cava in the right atrium and the oxygenated blood enters the pulmonary vein in the left atrium. Then the first stage, atrial dystole, happens when the atrium receives blood and starts to fill. During this stage, the AV valves are shut so the blood can't pass through and the atrial pressure builds up and more blood fills them. The second stage is ventricle dystole, also known as passive filling. This is when the pressure of the blood of the atria fills up and forces the deoxygenated blood through the tricuspid valve and the oxygenated blood through the bicuspid valve. During this stage, 70% of the blood moves into the right and left ventricles. During these first two stages, there is no activity on the conduction system and also no contraction, meaning there's no impulse. There is also a tiny delay where the AV node delays the impulse so the atrium will perform its job. The third stage is atrial systole, where the atrium contracts and forces the remaining blood into the ventricles. When the ventricles are full, the AV valve is shut to stop the backflow into the atria. This stage is also known as ventricle dystole and active filling, as all the blood is in the ventricles. Also during this stage, the SA node stimulates a wave of depolarization which spreads through the atria and ends at the AV node, shown up to stage 3 on top to bottom. This impulse is what pushes the remaining 30% of the blood through the ventricles. The final stage is ventricle systole, and it's where the impulse from the AV node spreads impulses down the bundle of His, then the bundle branches and eventually up the Purkinje fibers, shown in stage 4 and 5, to spread impulses through the ventricles bottom to top, which makes the ventricles contract to force both the oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood out of the heart. The LS valves are forced open so the deoxygenated blood exits the pulmonary valve and the oxygenated blood exits the aortic valve, also known as the semilunar valve. The impulse returns to the SA node, and also known where the pacemaker is. Once the oxygenated blood leaves the aortic valve, it travels down through the arteries, then down the arterioles and the capillaries, where diffusion happens across the capillary beds into the muscles, and the muscle can move. When the deoxygenated blood leaves and travels through the venules and veins back up to the vena cava, up to the deoxygenated blood travels to the lungs and become oxygenated again, then the process is ready to start again. ANS influence on the cardiac cycle. There are two parts of the autonomic nervous system which has two different functions. The sympathetic nervous system increases cardiac output and speeds up, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system decreases cardiac output, which inhibits and slows down. To increase the heart rate, the cardiac control center will send an SN nerve, specifically the accelerator nerve, to the SA node. Before it reaches the SA node, it releases a transmitter called norepinephrine. This therefore increases the heart rate, contractility, and conduction velocity. To decrease the cardiac output, the CCC sends a PN to the SA node, which is called a vagus nerve, which releases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Therefore, this decreases the heart rate, contractility, and conduction velocity. Lastly, another way to speed up the heart rate is adrenaline, where the CCC sends an SA node to the adrenaline gland, which will travel along the bloodstream to speed up the heart rate. Blood structure and function. Blood plays an important role in regulating the body's system and maintaining homeostasis. Red blood cells have a role to transport oxygen around the body, and they have a specific structural characteristics that will help them with their function. For example, they have a small size which lets red blood cells pass through narrow capillaries. They also have a flattened disc shape which provides a large surface area allowing rapid diffusion of oxygen. They contain hemoglobin to absorb oxygen in the lungs and release oxygen in the rest of the body. White blood cells' role is to protect against disease. They are used in the bloodstream as transportation to infection areas. There are two types of red blood cells, leukocytes and lymphocytes. Leukocytes' origin is in red blood bone marrow and are the biggest white blood cells. They also last for a few hours, whereas lymphocytes' origin is in the spleen and play a role in the formation of antibodies. Their lifespan is unknown. Platelets, their role is to help the blood clot. They are the smallest substance in blood, and they are colourless and have no nucleus. They release an enzyme which they contract air, fat, and fatty deposits. Their lifespan is 7 to 9 days. Their structural characteristics help their functions to stop bleeding and clumping and clotting blood vessels. Plasma. Lastly, the plasma is structured to have 90% water and is a straw-like colour and consists of 55% of the total blood volume. The function of the plasma is to help maintain optimal body temperature through the organism. It also helps to control the pH of the body and the body's tissue, maintaining this within a range at which the cells can thrive. As you can see in the picture, the vascular pathway of blood has 5 vessels contained in it: the arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules and veins. Arteries. Artery walls have the thickest muscular and elastic wall, as you can see in the 2 pictures. To expand, the blood surges through and recoils after. It's structured in a way that to help the function, as the blood is under high pressure and high velocity as it's ejected from the heart. It's also controlled by the sympathetic nervous system and generally carry blood away from the heart. They have a big diameter and a thick wall, and they have fibrous tissue and endothelial layer, which helps to the high blood velocity. Labelled in the picture, both arteries have the tunica media, tunica intermedia, and a tunica externa to help with the stretch and recoil as the blood has just ejected from the heart. Arterioles. Arterioles are tiny branches of arteries that lead to capillaries. They are controlled again by the SNS. The fact that they have smooth muscle tissue wrapped around, as shown in the left picture, means they are able to vasoconstrict and vasodilate. The reason they can do this is that it can help their function in controlling the distribution of blood, where it goes and where it doesn't go, including transporting blood from arteries to capillaries. When they have a small diameter, 30 micrometers, thin, really tiny wall, but still contain endothelia and smooth muscle tissue. They have a tunica media layer to allow vasoconstriction and vasodilation. They don't have any elastic or fibrous tissue. As you can see in the right picture, a precapillary sphincter also control the flow of blood. Capillaries. If the blood is traveling through capillaries, it is at a slow rate as they are very narrow and 1 cell thick. They have a tunica interna only because you can see in the picture of the endothelial cells, which is a basement membrane. Its thin wall provides a short diffusion distance, and its small diameter slows the flow to increase the diffusion rate. An enormous number of capillaries provides huge surface area, increase the diffusion. These structural characteristics will help with the function as its gas exchange happens, as oxygen and carbon dioxide will diffuse from one place to another to supply us with gas or remove waste products. The blood pressure and blood flows is much lower as the total area of capillaries is larger. Venules. Venules take blood away from capillary networks and feed into bigger veins. They have relatively small diameter and wall thickness. They don't contain any elastic and smooth tissue, and they don't have to stretch and recoil because they don't. But they do have an endothelium and fibrous tissue. They are larger than capillaries but smaller than veins. They help their only function, which is to drain blood from the capillaries into veins. So veins. The walls of veins consist of 3 layers of tissue that are thinner and less elastic than arteries. Veins include valves that aid the return of blood to the heart by preventing blood from flowing into the nerve direction known as venous return. They have a large diameter and a big lumen to allow blood to return towards the heart and have a very low blood pressure. It's very important that the skeletal muscle pump mechanism is working to help the veins do their job, because the massaging action of the skeletal muscles helps squeeze the blood back up to the veins against gravity to get it back into the heart.